Our next speaker, Dionne Bunsha, is going to be helping us land back here in Vancouver in a way, bridging, we heard Trudeau this week and the Canadian media trying to minimize the disconnection between his visit there and what's going on with Modi. And Dionne is in a good position to bring us here because she both has deep connections in her work as a former senior assistant editor at Frontline magazine, traveling extensively looking at the human rights, social justice and environmental issues in India, but also with her experience as a writer, a nonfiction book, Scarred Experiments with Violence in Gujarat, published widely around the world and here locally. And when I'm speaking about being grounded in local territory, she's currently coordinating a mapping project around Indigenous knowledge in the Lower Fraser First Nations and teaches at Kwantlen. So without any further ado.
So thanks for inviting me to be part of this event. It's really an honor to be here to celebrate the launch of Global Discontents by Chomsky and David Barsamian, two of my heroes. They've been a big part of my growing up when I was a student and have influenced me a lot throughout. And as you know, they're one of the foremost political thinkers in the world today and a rare voice of truth in today's world. So I'm really honored to be here. Thanks for having me. So there's so much inequality and tyranny in the world today, even in countries like the US and India that are supposed to be the world's largest democracies. And as we know that we keep watching the most absurd and bizarre things unfold before us, and it's kind of become normal now. So I think it's a book like this is really important in these times where everything that's absurd has become so normalized. Kinds of brings us back to grounding and think about the insanity around us and how we can make sense of it. And we kind of mistake the tyranny that we live in for freedom. And so voices of Chomsky and David are really important today. They give us insight, clarity and hope in a world that's full of alternative truths and fake news. I'm just very honored to be here. Thanks, David, for always being such an inspiring and enlightening voice. I've been asked to come here and speak about the threat to democracy in India. And so this is one of my favorite rants, so you're really in for it now. I'll just start by saying that before there was Trump, there was Modi. And India's current Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, really puts Trump to shame in many ways. Unfortunately, we don't hear much about that in the media today. So India is led by a really violent Hindu extremist party called the Bharatiya Janata Party, or the BJP for short. This party has kind of done a lot in the last 4 years, or even before that, before they were in power, to hijack democracy and human rights in India. Modi and his allies are very organized in engineering violence, way more than the Republicans in the US, and have spread widespread terror and hatred throughout the country, jeopardizing institutions in a way that we've never seen before in India. The BJP, let me give you a little background of what the BJP is about and how its political history in some sense. It's part of a much larger group of Hindu nationalist and terrorist organizations called the Sangh Parivar. And the Sangh Parivar basically is called a family of some kind. It's one of their members assassinated Gandhi. His name was Godse. Their founders drew inspiration from the Nazis in Germany and Italy for Mussolini. And they're organized very much in terms of how the fascists were organized. So like several fascist movements, they're also very closely aligned with capital, right? And so most of their policies favor, powerful interests rather than the most marginalized. Also, the Sangh Parivar has a network of thousands. It's a network of thousands of organizations, and they have like women's organizations, educational organizations, students groups, all kinds of different organizations, all working towards a common goal, and that goal is to make India a Hindu nation, which it is not. India is a secular country, as mandated in our constitution, but their whole aim is to change that. So all their actions are geared towards that end in a very organized way. Unlike most other political parties in India, which are quite chaotic and disorganized. So that's their advantage. They don't just have their political wing, which is the BJP, but they have all these other organizations working alongside to further that goal. So you don't know what one hand is doing, right? So, you may have all these people on the ground creating trouble, but you can never trace it back to the BJP, although they will, support them and make sure they don't get arrested, make sure they never punish, that kind of stuff. So it's a very well organized kind of network. And so, they also have stormtroopers on the ground, vigilante groups on the streets who are trained to engineer violence at the drop of a hat when they want to. There are people, they have training camps that kind of train people on how to create trouble and indoctrinate people into this whole way of thinking. So under their rule, every form of freedom in India has been under threat. And to start with, I'll just start listing some of the things that have been happening in India. To start with, of course, the most targeted groups are the minorities. Because for every kind of authoritarian rule, the way they get people is to create scapegoats, right? So who are the scapegoats in India that, the Hindu right kind of targets? It's the Muslims, it's the lower castes, and it's the indigenous people of India. So, Muslims, as you all know, all over the world are the easiest target right now. It's very easy to label them as terrorists. And since India also has a past history of bad relations with Pakistan, people are very easily considered, anti-national, supporting Pakistan, all this kind of stuff. And so, the whole ideology written in the philosophy of the Sangh Parivar is that India is a Hindu nation and all Muslims should be treated as second-class citizens. And over the years, there have been many, very planned attacks against Muslims. The most recent was a genocide against Muslims in Gujarat, the state that Narendra Modi was the chief minister of before he became Prime Minister of India. And I reported on that whole genocide for years. So, the whole intimidation of Muslims continues to date in various forms. Even on an everyday basis, like my Muslim friends find it very difficult to find a place to rent because no one wants to rent to Muslims, right? And these are people who, are not really marginalized and are well educated, so the top 1% of Indians were because they're Muslims. So can you imagine what happens to the really poor Muslims? Christians are also under attack, primarily because there's a ideological fight. They don't like having Christian schools and they want people indoctrinated in the Hindu way of life. There are attacks on celebrations of Christmas, on churches, things like that. So it's also a very ideological fight going on. As you know, Dalits or lower castes are the worst treated in India. And the BJP is largely a upper caste or middle caste party. So all their supporters have felt very empowered after they've come to power. And, so Dalits in most villages are more marginalized. India may seem like a modern country, but the way Dalits and lower castes are treated in India is really shameful. They are not allowed to enter temples still. They segregate children in schools based on caste. I mean, the list goes on and on. So like I said, a lot of that, because of the empowerment of certain groups that are aligned with the BJP, it's easier for people to target, Dalits. It's also, they've instituted this beef ban. So they've instituted a ban on beef in India. And so again, the people who do all the dirty work of being butchers and stuff like that, making leather, are all either Muslims or Dalits, and so their businesses have been totally destroyed by this. The livestock sector is a big part of the Indian rural economy, totally destroyed by the beef ban. And there's like a huge section of, there have been many reports of, people who have been lynched and killed because they were transporting beef, or transporting a dead cattle, or they were eating beef or whatever. So, that's another area of great conflict right now in India. And then, of course, indigenous people, another very well-known marginalized group. So again, there's a kind of ideological battle to try to reconvert indigenous people to Hinduism, right? So, there's all this going on. The other area of freedom that's been targeted is just the pure freedom to eat and drink what you choose. So you can't eat beef, and beef is like it's a poor person's source of protein, right? For Muslims, Dalits, this is their main source of protein. So that's targeted, and like I said, people eating beef have been killed, which is quite crazy. There's a ban on all alcohol within 500 meters of a highway. So, and the women going to bars have been attacked by, the self-righteous right wing, because they're not adhering to Indian values. They've become too westernized, right? So, the freedom to love has been targeted. So, they have this thing called love jihad that's going on in India, the very funny word, where they actually these groups actually go and kidnap Hindu women who have married either Muslim or Christian boys. And the parents are against it, so they actually go kidnap the girls and bring them back to their parents, or first take them, maybe to a halfway house that some thug owns, if she's pregnant, force an abortion and then bring her back. And I have personally interviewed one of these thugs, who bragged to me about kidnapping 400 women. And this was before Modi came to power. This was when he was in power in Gujarat. And this was it started in Gujarat and now has spread all over India. So God knows how many women have been kidnapped in this way, right? That's another area. And then, of course, now when there's Valentine's Day, that's again too westernized, so they target couples who they see just, it's crazy. So again, another very important aspect of Indian society that's freedom is the freedom of speech and expression. So, the Indian media is relatively quite independent, and you do have a lot of reasonable amount of journalists and dissidents speaking out, but a lot of them have been killed in the last few years. The most recent is a very high-profile journalist called Gauri Lankesh, who was killed last year. And when Gauri Lankesh was killed, a BJP leader said, a bitch has died and now the dogs are barking. So it just gives you an idea of the impudence that power has brought about here. So anyways, it's crazy. Also, there's a very big Indian director who's making a film based on a historical fable, which it depicts a Rajput princess falling in love with a Muslim, or that's what they thought with us. That's what they thought. So they burnt the sets of that, and this is one of Bollywood's top directors. They burnt the sets of the film. They threatened the director and India's biggest Bollywood actress with death threats. When the film was finally released, they burnt a bus of school children that was going to see the film. So this is the level at which the terror operates. Also economic freedom. So I'm not sure if you're aware, but maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, the Modi government announced overnight that this policy called demonetization. And what that meant was overnight, within a matter of 4 hours, all 500 and 1,000 rupee notes were going to be invalid. And this kind of paralyzed the economy, and more importantly paralyzed the informal economy in India, which is informal by mean like the poorest people who don't have bank accounts and are paid in cash, right? And there were like people started like standing outside banks for hours trying to change their money because they only had a short amount of time to kind of exchange their notes for money that was valid. People died in those lines. It was chaos, okay? It totally disrupted the rural economy in a way that was quite, and even the urban economy, because many people, don't have bank accounts and were being paid in cash. And suddenly it was not valid, and they couldn't even exchange it for something that was valid. They didn't have the capacity to deal with that. And of course, the whole, crony capitalism that goes on in any kind of fascist, so-called government. Modi campaigned using jets of India's biggest billionaires, owned by India's biggest billionaires, and there are lots of payoffs that followed. He's often seen in advertisements of big front page advertisements advertising for companies, which we've never seen any prime minister do ever. And meanwhile thousands of farmers, and there's also the loans of all the biggest companies of the biggest billionaires in India have been written off. So they own billions and billions of rupees to the banks, but it's all been written off. Whereas farmers who are in debt, their loans are not written off, and you have thousands of farmers who committed suicide in India. So, authoritarianism is a growing trend, like David said, not only in India, but in several other countries like the US, Russia, Turkey, Philippines. And several of these governments are serving the interests of big capitalists today. And the policies that further accentuate equality, and they're just using hatred to divide the poor, right? By creating a false enemy, whether it's the Muslims or in the US, it's the Mexicans or whoever. And so this book, Global Discontents, explores the threats to democracy and freedom by the world's most powerful. And really it's a must-read for anyone who wants to wake up from the social media stupor that we all live in. So please get a copy, it's a must-read.
Stupor. Yes.